Hey there. So say you've opened Autodesk Inventor for the first time ever. What do you do? Well, I'm going to try to show that today. So first things first, when you're looking here, you've got an overload of information. At the bottom, you've got your recent documents, and you may end up using this later. But I find that most people really don't because, it's easier to ensure you're opening the right thing if you just go into on the Get Started tab, open, and actually navigating to what you need. But anyway, so other than that, we've got the option right here to hit new on these, and then it actually shows what your project area is, any shortcuts you add, and file details. I actually don't tend to use any of this area, but some people do, especially drawing. I don't use this because it's preferred to use IDWs. There's two different drawing file types, and DWG is less preferred. I guess, there's perks with it. You can open it in AutoCAD or Inventor, but when you try to open it without being in Inventor, it'll always open in AutoCAD. So I tend to use, if I were to hit new, I tend to use this IDW instead. But this is the format that I would say to go through, is just to hit new every time when you're going to do something. And then on the left you have your templates. So if you're doing an English drawing, there's already a template set up for the part, the assembly, the drawing, presentation, and then the metric has their own versions. And as you can see, it's it's a little more convoluted. There's different formats. It's not just ANC like in America. But yeah, so for the sake of demonstration, let's fire up the standard IN part. That's going to be your go-to, which is going to be your inches. I'm just going to ignore that for now. I don't have my flash drive plugged in. It's going to be your inches template for just a standard part. So when you get here, you've got your browser bar, and your part's name is listed right here, and that icon actually is considered the file. So like if I were wanting to edit the part, I could always right click it. You can actually copy it as well from here, but we'll worry about that later. So first things first, when you're drawing, you want your part to be positioned in a good position when you're drawing it. So if I were to start a sketch by hitting on the 3D tab, sketch panel, just start 2D sketch, it prompts you with choosing a plane, and your view cube is positioned in a way where you're kind of looking at the planes. So if I were to click this plane, the XY, it's going to draw where the front is actually the front. So that's ideal. Depending on what you're making, it may be different, but the majority of the time you're going to be drawing on this quote-unquote front plane. And technically, yeah, they don't call them front and top and side, but that's what they are. But choose your planes wisely. The last thing you want to do is ignore the view cube, because you'll be drawing your part upside down before you know it. And on that note, right click on your view cube and hit options, and make sure to choose keep model upright. Otherwise you really will end up with your part upside down and not realize it. Okay, so anyways, Inventor is a relationship based drafting program. So when you're drawing, you can draw lines all you want, but then you have to add in relationships in order to get the geometry where you want it. So like the advised way to go about drawing things is to draw a rough shape of what you want and then go back and edit it later. So like in this case, I'm just going to casually draw on a square, but then I can actually just pull the points and adjust it. So it's very dynamic. So there's a big focus on drawing things, sometimes exaggerated, and I'll show you what I mean. But first I want to talk about this little point right here. So this yellow point is, if I were to go and pivot my model so it's not looking directly at it, and I were to select these planes, you can kind of see that point is at the intersection of these planes. This is your origin, kind of like in drafting or math class. You would have like a Cartesian plane. Well, consider this like your crosshair, and basically you're going to want to always draw things in reference to this origin point for two reasons. I won't hunker down too hard on it in this first video, but basically you're going to want to fully constrain parts. And if you notice down here, there's that word phrase right there, fully constrained. But the biggest thing besides that is using these planes later for constraining in assemblies is going to be a must. So you want to draw, ideally when you have a part, you know, have it centered so that you can use those constraints with the planes later. Or, you know, if you're just starting out, it's okay just to connect to the point. You know, a lot of times starting out, people will just draw like this, you know, and just, you know, make sure it's there. And if you notice these lines are black, that's because they're unable to move. There's a relationship paired, and I can hit this button down here to turn relationships on and off to view them. But basically, there's a relationship established saying that these, you know, two lines end at this point. And, you know, you probably wonder, well, how do I even draw a line? You know, I've been kind of casually doing it, but I haven't talked about it. So we'll talk about the relationships more. I just want you to know that a big part is going to be, yeah, doing your relationships and drawing in a meaningful way. So, you know, there's another tidbit to it, too. You may have noticed that I'm not doing anything special to make this line horizontal. But do you see whenever I'm moving my mouse, it shows a degree. Whenever I get to what would probably be horizontal, you see this little icon appear. You know, I can't really point to it, it'll move, but it's down to the right, right beside the degrees. So that's the actual horizontal constraint, which you can see up here. So basically, by default, if you were to go into Inventor's settings here, I think it's in Sketch. Oh no, you know, it's actually in Document Settings, or Application Settings. By default, we have inferred constraints, and basically what it does is it'll imply constraints for you. So if you're drawing along and you draw things that look like they should be parallel and perpendicular to each other, it'll actually set them up to be. And you know, it can actually apply all of these. If you aren't careful, you may end up putting constraints in you don't need. So it's crucial that you're drawing mindfully, you know, and I'm pretty loose with it, and if I mess up, I'll just go back and delete it. But especially starting out, be very careful where you're drawing. So, you know, if I was going to draw a triangle, I have to be cautious, because if you notice right here, it's trying to draw a perpendicular constraint. You know, you can see up here perpendicular, but it shows it above the 0.665. So it's going to automatically apply it. Now, if I'm not careful and I end up drawing this just right, I can also end up putting a locked-in angle as well, you know, like on that slant. So it's all about just knowing what to do. But to draw a line, you click the item. You know, this applies for all of these pieces of sketch geometry, and there's some drop downs here with other options, but usually, you know, if it's important, it's probably on the main panel already. But, you know, so I can click a line, and I can click a point, and then it has you know, the continuation, and all you're doing is clicking a second point. So, you know, you can then after that click another point, and so on. You know, nothing crazy. I can select it all and hit the delete key. Now, what happens a lot of the time, people are drawing and they mess up and they just delete it all and they want to start over, but they don't realize, oh no, I've lost my yellow point. So if you do lose it, you know, when you try to draw, you know, it'll let you kind of like snap to that middle still, but the only difference is, notice our lines aren't black now. The reason for that is because there's nothing to tie that relationship to. So if you end up losing this origin point, which we've talked about being extremely important, go ahead and go to project geometry up here, and what it does is it transfers part information to the active sketch that you're in. So in this case, I just want to project the center point back in. And that's it. After that, you know, you can constrain it in there, and we'll talk more about constraints as we go on. But unfortunately, you pretty much have to kind of learn the majority of the basics all at once, you know. So, you know, whenever I'm actually drawing a line and I click on this point, I'm actually applying a constraint there as well. You know, I mentioned it's sticking to it. So, you know, if I were to go and try to tug it, it's not going to let me move it. So another way that you can apply a constraint if you've already drawn geometry is you can grab that point and hover over it, and you notice that you get that green dot right there. If I let go, now it's tied in just like that. You know, sometimes it's useful to have, you know, like constraints that you're just doing coincidence on, but and that's what that is, a coincidence. It says, you know, like two things coincide at the same time. And if you notice, you know, if I hover over most of these items, they actually tell you what they do. So, you know, like basically if you're really trying to figure out how to do things, you can hover and then hit F1 for more help, as you see on the bottom, and it'll take you to Inventor's Knowledge Network, which I can go ahead and hit and open. And basically through here, you know, you'll see how to basically go about using these commands, and you can search through and try to find things. You know, if you're not sure, you can search for a keyword. But I'm going to just go ahead and draw something and kind of show you stylistically how I would go about it, and we'll go from there. So I'm actually, let's see, I'm going to, I don't know what I'm going to draw. I think I'm going to delete this sketch though right here and draw a top view instead. And this is it's perfect that I chose a top view. Actually, this is the thing that Inventor does, and it drives me crazy, guys. But if you look over here at the view cube, it shows top, but it's not left to right red. You know, basically what happens is when you start a top view, a lot of times it'll rotate your view cube. So you know, you just need to hit this little arrow to turn it. So now we're looking truly at the top view. You know, if I were to go and hit down arrow, it would show the front view. So I accidentally hit start sketch again to close it. I'm gonna go and rotate back, and I'm gonna draw a rough shape here, and it's gonna be boxy. So I'm just gonna draw and make sure that it's giving those implied or inferred constraints on it. I'm just gonna do this shape right here. And if you notice on the bottom there, it's showing perpendicular, like right here. I'm going to make sure it's getting that. And then if you notice, whenever I'm moving this vertical line down, this one over here, when I get in line with it, it's going to do like a dotted line between them. What this is saying is these 2 points are in line with each other. So now I can just come straight over and close it. And this is all fine and dandy, but there's more to do after you draw a profile. So I can click these points and position them by, you know, just grabbing and like click, hold, and move, and it adjusts them. So when you're actually modeling up something, you shouldn't be able to adjust them actually. That's kind of the goal. So first things first, I'm going to, I am going to use a constraint here, and it's coincident, and all it means, you know, like I said, is it's going to have two things coincide. So I'm going to choose the midpoint of this line. You can see it's like highlighting a green dot, so I'm going to click it. And I'm going to click the origin, and it'll tie it in. So now, you know, basically I can move it this way, and I can also move it this way, but I can't move this line off of that point. So the next thing you would want to do is just dimension it. You know, all you do with the dimension is you turn it on, you click a line, you click there. You can also click a point to a point. But generally speaking, when you're doing dimensions, it's actually kind of similar to adding a relationship. You know, with constraints, it's giving a lot more information. You realize, so for whatever reason, it is better to click the line if you can and dimension it from there. So I'm just going to kind of keep it the same shape it is, but round these to whole numbers. And all you do to edit those is if you have the dimensioning tool still on, you just click the dimension and it'll edit it. If not, and you've hit escape to close, you know, your last command, you can just double click and then type in your number. You can either hit the checkbox or you can hit enter, and that's it. You know, the perk of having relationship based modeling, I can adjust these numbers on the fly and it'll dynamically adjust too. So I'm just gonna hit finish sketch. I think I'm fine with what we have here, and basically what this will do is it'll close the sketch, and now you're seeing it on that top view, but it positions in the direction that we, you know, intended to draw it. So, you know, obviously I talked about how I want to have it on the top view. Well, it is. So now I'm going to go and choose the extrusion command, and what this does is it basically takes that sketch and uses it to produce a 3D shape. And you know, the same deal, if you look at the create panel, there's different types. There's your extrusion. Revolve, you know, you take a certain sketch and you spin it around an axis. Sweep, you're going to move a profile along a path. There's different kinds. So, you know, as you get more familiar, you'll learn what to do with what. But basically starting out, you're mostly going to use extrusion. So I'm going to extrude this. I'm just going to do both ways. This is a... usually when you turn on a command, there's going to be a dialog box telling you what to do. And by default, it worked for me, but most of the time it'll pull your profile without even having to do anything. So if it doesn't though, for whatever reason, if you hover, you'll see it highlights the area. And if I click it, it'll expand it. And then, you know, you probably don't need to mess with from. Eventually you can kind of get in the rhythm of extruding it between two regions or whatever, but we're not going to worry about that for now. So then you have directions. You can go this way, or you can flip it and go that way. You can go both ways an equal amount, or you can go both ways with two different values. If you notice, it's definitely asymmetric. You've got about half the value versus twice the value there. But for this case, I'm going to do symmetric, which is ideally the go-to, you know, on a normal thing. And I'll just do, we'll do 3. And then down here, you'll probably never use it, but you might at some point. You can do a taper. You know, basically what it does is it takes that shape and it extrudes it at an angle outward, though, or inward, depending on which way you go. And then, you know, you won't mess with iMates for some time, but there is an option for that. And then you can also expand this and see a little more. You know, like technically, you can do cuts or joins. If you had more features than one, you may actually be messing with this. But basically, the idea is, you know, you can also remove a shape as well as add it. So I'm just gonna close that back though, and actually it already applied it somehow. So basically, if it does that, you know, it's because I hit the plus button. It actually created it on the spot apparently. But if you have a feature you don't need, just click on it in the browser and just hit delete on your keyboard. And then over here, you know, this is something that drives me crazy. When you're trying to work with a model, you really don't want to see your sketch. When you're done, you know, you don't anyways. Like I can edit this right here. Without being in the sketch, I can just double click this dimension, change it to 2, and, you know, hit this little update button up here. It's a little lightning bolt, and it'll change the sketch, which is fine. But I still prefer to go and edit the sketch itself. But when you're done with a sketch, make sure to right click it and hit visibility. And you'll notice it goes from like a blue color to a light gray, basically implying it's not visible right now. So the next big thing is how to reuse geometry. So if I were to hit the start new sketch, you know, before I used the plane, but this time I'm gonna work with this surface here. So I'm gonna click on it. It puts me in a top view, and you know, the sketch is positioned in reference. If you see the crosshair there, in reference to that face, it's aligned with it. So say I was gonna draw like this little L shape here, and you know, a little pro tip. I don't really like to do this, but some people are a fan. You notice it's given that dark blue area there with a number. I can actually type in right now 2. And it'll give it a length and a dimension, which is kind of cool. I feel like there's pros and cons of it, but you know, if you like doing that as a starter, you know, it's not too bad. I actually still prefer dimensioning myself. But I'm just going to slap in some values, and I don't think I need this one. No. Okay, so now I've got this cool shape, which I can grab, you know, hold and pull. But what do I do with it? How do I get it to attach here? You know, like I can kind of line it up, but it's not really lined up. So there's a trick to that. And this is a great time, before we get into that, to mention down here, I talked about fully constrained earlier. If you notice, it says we need 2 dimensions, okay? That is basically saying what we're missing to make this not move. You know, I talked about relationships and full definition. That's what you're going for in these parts. Basically what we're missing in this case is how far is it horizontally to the origin, and then how far is it vertically to the origin. When you add those, we have it fully constrained. I don't expect you to be a wizard at full definition immediately, but basically what you're trying to do is make it so that whenever you're done, nothing moves. And I'll show you when I get done here. But what you need to do is hit project geometry and click this face. If you notice, it's highlighted. I guess technically you could also hit the edges if you don't want to use it all. But you're gonna now tie this part into this area, and you could just lazily use a coincident, and that would do the whole thing. But it's really freaking hard to edit. I try to avoid using coincident where I can, but since you're just starting out, you know, you are welcome just to grab it and just let it go right there. You know, that's pretty straightforward. If you want to, you know, try to better yourself from the start though, there's this command here called collinear. What collinear does, by looking at the picture, you can kind of tell. It'll take two lines and it'll make them aligned to the same line. They will coincide basically on that line. They're collinear, math phrase. So I'm going to click that, click this top line, click this top line, and then I can do the same thing with these two verticals. Click this vertical and that vertical. And you know, you may have noticed it's got these little constraints showing. The reason I prefer collinear is, you know, say I had these, I decided I didn't want this part right there. I can turn on my visibility for constraints. I can click on this collinear, right click it and hit delete. And you know, now I can move it again like I could before. It's really hard to delete a coincident though. But we'll talk more about that later. Just know, like, if you've drawn it and you miss something, turning on the constraints, you can actually go in and delete something, you know, because clearly we've got a bunch of perpendiculars and I didn't put those in. Same with the horizontal. So knowing you can delete them will help you a lot. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people draw and you know, they've got a constraint in there that they don't realize that Inventor is inferred, and it can make life insanely difficult. A lot of times it happens with angled dimensions because you know, you're supposed to draw things in Inventor similar in scale to what you want it to be, and then you adjust the relationship accordingly, you know. But a lot of times people draw it and they just don't draw it well. They're not used to the program, you know, like getting used to clicking and moving and all of that, and they end up with it kind of out of proportions, and then you have a constraint in there you don't need. And with angles especially, it's hard because, you know, like when you're drawing, you kind of have to exaggerate. So like if I'm drawing, you know, for instance, like an angle here, if I were going to not be careful about it, I may end up putting in like a 135, and then it'll basically lock itself in. It'll put a constraint in there because then it knows what it thinks it knows, what you want. And you have to be really cautious. So like if you're doing angles in particular, it's good to exaggerate what it should look like. Say I know it should be a 45 even. I'll probably do it like way up here just so I know it's for sure not implying any kind of constraint on its own. So you have to, it's one of those things you'll get comfortable with the program, but knowing what it's doing in the background is always a plus going forward. So the next thing I'm going to do is hit extrude. It shows my profile. And I'm going to play around with some of these other options. So I talked about, you know, direction and how you can cut, you know, but I didn't really talk about, let me turn join back on. I didn't really talk about these. So one of my favorite things about extrusions is this right here. You can do it through all, and, you know, I'll show you with the whole what that does. But a 2, basically what you're saying is I'll take this profile and I'll extrude it to whatever I click. So I'm going to choose this face. And basically just like that, it'll extrude the same length as this part. You can also do to next. If you had like a bunch of features, it could like cut up to the next feature, but we're looking for 2 here, and we're making a monster of a part. But I'm gonna go ahead and start another sketch on this face. We'll go ahead and do an angle just so we have it to talk about. So whenever I'm doing like a chamfer, which is, you know, like a slanted cut, it would basically be like a cut that went through here. I usually just use the command, but if you are doing it in a sketch for whatever reason, the way I advise doing it is like this. Instead of trying to draw it, you know, like on the part and, you know, click through and draw it here, that's kind of a pain. And I don't know if you notice what's actually happening there. This is one of the reasons I don't draw it on a part. 1, you can miss a click and it may be somewhere you don't think it is, but 2, when I draw a line, it ends the command. It doesn't continuously draw the line edges. So then I click and, you know, there it is again, not drawing. So you end up having to do a lot more precise clicking to draw it. So that's one problem. And the other problem is it tries to tie the geometry together. So I think that it's best just to draw it right here, just outside. And this is what I was talking about with exaggerated proportions. So I'm just going to do a collinear and another collinear. And now, you know, I can, oh, apparently I must have missed a click myself. So if this ever happens to you, just grab that point and pull it to the end of your line. I don't want to mess it up, so I'm actually just going to undo, Control Z, by the way. And I'm going to use a coincident. I like to use the commands versus the actual pulling, but you can pull it. So collinear. back to square one. So now when I pull it, you know, it moves freely. And I can just go in and slap an angle, whatever I want, you know, maybe 22.5, I don't know. You know, let's go ahead and do 45, though. That's pretty typical. And then, you know, the only thing I'm missing now, if I were to go and grab and pull, I'm missing how big of a, you know, leg I have on it. In this case, I'll just, you can't hardly click lines when you do these. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually dimension a triangle before I bring it over, just so it's easier to edit later. But I'll just put 1 on here. And, you know, you may notice now all the lines are black. That means that your sketch is probably fully constrained. You can double check that if you have a pen over here. You can hover and it'll say fully constrained. And down here to say fully constrained. And this is, you know, generally the way you track these things in a sketch. It's obviously different. If you aren't in the sketch, you won't see it. So I'm just going to roll with that. And now you notice you can't see the fully constrained. That's what I was talking about. It's only in the sketch level. Alright, so I'm going to click this triangle and I will hit cut on the boolean. When I do cut, it'll actually change direction. And as you see, we don't actually really need to change anything, but I'm just going to hit 2 next. Basically what it'll do is it'll just extrude through there. The only reason I don't like to keep it at 1 like it had was because basically the distance is not always going to be 1. It was convenient that it worked there, you know. And then let's see, say you did want to do a chamfer, you know, kind of like that one there. You can actually do that pretty easy. I could do the same exact chamfer here, which is going to be, you know, that leg distance of 1 and the angle of 45, and I can click these face and edge and get that same chamfer a lot quicker. So that's actually like the way that, you know, I would typically do that, but sometimes there is a cause for drawing it on a sketch level. It just depends on what you're doing, you know. Let's see, is there anything else that I would like to talk about here? Definitely it's a big focus to make sure you're reusing geometry. You know, every time if you notice these yellow edges, that's projected geometry. I'm making sure to use it all the time. And you know, like basically the same style is going to work for every sketch item. So if I'm drawing a circle, I just click a point and then I click a radius size or diameter size, and then, you know, you can just do it an easy dimension and you know, give it a size. In that case, my circle's located because I chose the center of the part. I might as well do it through all here for you. This is going to be a weird cut, but basically I added it into my old sketch, you know, because you can go back and edit it and add stuff. So if you notice, it doesn't show a sketch for it anymore. I can right click the sketch and turn on visibility and add another feature like this. Hit cut, and in this case I'm going to do through all, so it's going to cut through everything. And then because of that, I don't need to really do anything else. But because I turned on the visibility and I used that sketch twice, you may notice now the browser looks kind of weird. You've got sketch 4 here and sketch 4 here, and then if I expand this bottom one, sketch 4 is here. So what's happened is I used that sketch for 2 different features, so now it's shared. So, you know, if you're pretty big on you know, Redditing or Twitter, whatever, you're going to see like this share symbol and recognize it. You know, that basically is saying this sketch is actually being used multiple places. It's shared between the features. So it kind of messes up your hierarchy a little bit because you know, then you're seeing it a lot. Even if you minimize these features where you don't see their children's sketches, you know, you're still going to see it here, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. Let's see. I'm going to actually go back and remove that sketch from there, or the circle from there, and just do it traditionally here, just to give you another example. Actually, you know what? Let's do a rectangle this time. So you've got various different options underneath rectangles. This is where you're going to get your polygons, your slots, and then various types of rectangle. I usually use 2-point or 2-point center. It depends on what you're going for, but I love 2-point center because you can just click a point, tie it in, give it a size, and call it a day, you know. And basically I can just do it through all. It gives this goofy shape. Let's see, that's pretty much it. There are some editing components up here, you know, like say, you know, I don't know, I decided for whatever reason I needed a little extra geometry in here. I can actually like draw arbitrarily past an object again, exaggerating, and you can just use trim, and just to give you a little look at it, you can click an edge and trim it. So all I got to do is it'll recognize there's a boundary between this line and this line. I can just click and it'll trim it. I can also click, hold, and pull, and it'll trim multiple things. You know, so I can go through here and just casually take a little tour of town and trim away. You know, you can do an offset, which means it'll basically duplicate this part a certain distance from the other one, and it implies a lot of relationships by doing that. But it's pretty useful. Same thing would extend. It's the exact opposite of trim. You know, if you have a boundary, it can extend to the boundary. You can scale things as you need, rotate them. You can even do a split, which is one of my favorites. Basically, like this line, if I were to click right here, it's going to divide it into two parts where that boundary was. So if you decided, oh man, I don't need that extra, but you don't want to possibly lose anything, you know, you can just do a split. And then there's copy. The rest of it will kind of nail down with time, but you know, generally that should be enough to get you started with your drawing. You know, as you're learning how to use things, you know, just hover over them, hit F1, read about them a little bit. There's so much to Inventor, you really can't cover it all in one go, but we'll get there with time. I think it's going to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching, everybody.